Mars, the planet to which mankind wants to bring civilization. Although we'd like to bring our civilization here, but it's far from habitable at the moment. But reaching Mars and sending humans to the Red Planet is one of the most important goals of scientists working in the field of astronomy and space sciences. Now I would like to tell you about a scenario that has been the subject of films. Let's say that we achieve our goals and reach Mars. Imagine that we encounter something unexpected in one of the dozens of caves on the Red Planet. Inscriptions.
In this video, we are going to talk about a question that may be as old as humanity itself. Can the existence of God be proven 100%? In other words, can the limited human mind comprehend an absolute, infinite being like God? If it can't, how can it be sure that there is a God? Isn't that more of an assumption or wishful thinking? Look, the answer to this question is so critical that if we say no, it cannot be proven, we will be saying that the beliefs of all believers up to this time and all believers in the future are really just a simple assumption. So, we need to carefully examine this question, which may be as old as humanity itself, and address a few things. First of all, let's look at what proof is. It's called revealing the real aspect of a thing by bringing one or more evidences that will create certain knowledge or victorious assumption about the reality of any claim. Therefore, the more understandable, clear, and the stronger the evidence is, the closer it is to the truth. Secondly, it should be known that all human beings, whether they realize it or not, when trying to find the truth, consider all the possibilities and accept as truth the one that has the most evidence and is the most reasonable and plausible. For example, when faced with an unsolved murder, with an unknown killer, a profile is created based on the evidence. Suspects who fit this profile will be arrested. And when there is a distinguished feature among the suspects, and there is evidence which is pointing to that distinguished feature, it is concluded that this person is the killer. And the stronger the evidence, the stronger the belief that that person is the killer. It moves away from being an assumption and comes closer to the truth. You can believe that any of the other suspects is the killer if you want to, but this remains an unjustified, irrational belief without evidence. Third is the claim that the evidence for a metaphysical being must also be metaphysical. First of all, this is just a claim, and the burden of proof is on the claimant. In other words, only when this claim is substantiated and proved, the evidence for metaphysical existence can be sought metaphysically. Because if an immaterial being has an influence on matter, the evidence of that being can of course be sought within matter. In the same way, it is also a claim that there should be a scientific proof. Yes, science may have brought civilization and technology to this point, but this does not mean that science is the only way to reach the truth. In addition, science simply rejects metaphysics as part of its methodology. Therefore, you cannot even do the simple task of reading a book with the scientific method. When someone reads a book, their subjective interpretation of the text cannot be explained by the scientific method. What we mean here is that when trying to prove any claim, the methods of proof should not be restricted. In other words, one should not be restricted to accept the evidence brought in one particular way only, because an evidence is an evidence. When we face a problem, such as illuminating a dark place, the method of illumination does not matter. It is illogical to say that it should be illuminated only by candles or only by lamps. It is enough to illuminate the room, regardless of which method was used. The fourth is, just because each person's perspective is different, just because our external senses may deceive us, does not mean that we cannot reach the truth. If we were to think that we could not reach the truth because of this reason, we would have to accept the fact that we would have to hesitate even our simple decisions in our daily lives, let alone in bringing civilization and technology to this current point. To put it this way, what's the reason that keeps you from jumping off the top of a building every day? The fact that you're going to die. Somebody comes to you and says, "Why wouldn't you jump?" What makes you think you're going to die? How many times have you seen people dying because they jumped off a building? How do you know that it's not just an act? What if it's all a lie? If he said, "Come on, jump," would that make you jump? However, what they say may be true. What makes you decide not to jump is not the probabilities he mentioned, but the lack of evidence for those probabilities. This is the characteristic of the human mind. It doesn't take into account possibilities for which there is no evidence. If this were not the case, we would not be able to sustain our lives, let alone the dreams of human beings sailing to other planets in space. We will generate a maybe, a possibility, a doubt, even in the face of obvious facts, and we would not be able to do anything. In short, the reason why you don't reach for a fire in front of you is your certain belief that it will burn your hand. When someone comes to you and says, but maybe this fire is not burning, maybe you're hallucinating, it does not diminish your belief that the fire will burn your hand, because there is no evidence for his claims. Fifth is, we need to know that knowing the existence of something is different from the knowing the nature of that thing. For instance, take the example we gave at the beginning. If you find some meaningful inscriptions in a cave on Mars, the first thing that will come to the minds of all people without hesitation will be aliens. What people mean by alien is a being who knows that he or she can create some meaning by writing these inscriptions, who has the will, the power, the strength to write, and of course has life. Suppose we found more and more irrefutable evidence for the existence of aliens and became certain of their existence. This does not mean that we can know what they look like or recognize them in every aspect, because knowing that they exist is one thing, but knowing them is another. Likewise, if there is evidence for God's existence, it will be mostly about the fact that He exists. So, the fact that we cannot know God in all His fullness, that His attributes are beyond human understanding, etc., does not mean that we cannot know that He exists. By the way, when all human beings are convinced of the existence of aliens, imagine how much humanity would take it seriously if someone said, but you attribute human characteristics to aliens. You think anthropomorphically. You think that since humans have intelligence, whatever caused these inscriptions must also be intelligent. Maybe these inscriptions are not from aliens. Aliens could even be metaphysical creatures. We will not be able to say that aliens are material creatures without evidence. Now, let's imagine a world taking into consideration all that we have said. Let's say it exactly the same as the world we're in now, but with the difference that there has never been any discussion of whether God exists or God does not exist. No claims about God have ever been made. We see a world in which the smallest building blocks of matter, atoms, could theoretically produce chaos in countless scenarios, yet despite all these scenarios they have ordered themselves in a miraculous and perfect way. While a human with intelligence, a mind, and a consciousness would fail to accomplish multiple complex tasks simultaneously, atoms do just that without having a mind, consciousness, or intelligence. How can we explain this? See, I'm not talking about an inscription that has been made and abundant as in the alien example just now. So we don't say that if we walk into a room and see a painting, then there must be a painter. Imagine billions of simple Lego pieces scattered in front of your eyes, suddenly starting to move and coming together to form a living organism. In the same way, how are we going to explain the trillions of atoms coming together to build a human body without the slightest bit of merit for the actions they seem to be doing? Again, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we are not talking about a static structure designed and abandoned. Imagine witnessing thousands of blind, deaf, unconscious dead people suddenly rising up and moving, and gradually constructing a building that requires architectural and engineering knowledge. Here, delusions like matter is eternal, atoms have always existed cannot answer our question. Imagine if those blind, dead men were eternal. That still does not answer how they suddenly rose up before our very eyes and built a magnificent building. And statements like, but you take yourself as a reference. You have intelligence, so you assume that atoms must also have intelligence to be able to do the things they do. Maybe atoms just don't need intelligence to do them, are considered alternatives, but are just unproven claims. We humans have only been researching for a few years and have only recently gained knowledge in anatomy, biophysics, biochemistry, embryology, physiology, histology, microbiology, etc. Taking this into account, we expect that everyone must admit that such things cannot be applied by something unintelligent and ignorant. See, in order to become an expert in any of these sciences, people with intelligence undergo years of training. And while a human being can specialize in a few sciences at most, how can we explain the fact that a single atom can be an expert in all sciences and apply them lawlessly without any mistakes? And we have mentioned only human beings. Every living or non-living structure that you can see with your eyes, that you can witness, is formed by these atoms. In other words, these atoms play a role in the implementation of all the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology that we have discovered, not only branches of science related to the human beings. Take the transmission of sounds, another of the thousands of things atoms do. If a person with ears to hear, an intellect to reason, and a mouth to utter words imitates the voices of a few people, he or she will appear on television and people would applaud and congratulate him or her. So, how would it be more logical to explain the fact that if there were 100 people in one place, each speaking in a different language with a different tone, every atom in the air, without exception, would convey the tone, language, and dialect of those 100 people without being surprised, without one voice interfering with the other? We have just mentioned that it is astonishing that a healthy, living human being with a conscious mind can imitate the voices of another human being so well. Now imagine that you're in a room and you witness a number of blind, deaf, lifeless dead people imitating the voices of other people who are talking next to them. Even if a Japanese person enters the room and speaks in Japanese, or a French person enters the room and speaks in French, those people who are deaf, dumb, and dead can imitate the voices of the speakers and convey them to each other with full pronunciation. Could you hide your amazement at such a phenomenon? In the same way, while we humans, who have the necessary qualifications for the job of imitating someone, have difficulty in imitating someone else's voice, while we cannot even pronounce the words correctly, let alone imitate the voice of someone whose language we do not know, does it not astonish you that beings who have no consciousness, no ears to hear, no mouth to speak, not even life, can accurately convey the voices of all people? We humans go through months of training to learn an unfamiliar language and become able to speak it with the correct pronunciation. But for the task of conveying the voices of all human beings with different languages, different voices, different ways of speaking, is it not necessary to have knowledge of the voice, the way of speaking, the dialect, the language of each human being? Moreover, we have only mentioned human voices. These beings called atoms are also involved in the transmission of all the sounds you hear, satellite signals and radio frequencies, regardless of their source. This may sound like something ordinary to you, but it cannot be normal for beings who do not possess the necessary attributes for the work they seem to be doing to do all these works. For example, we would be surprised if a human being suddenly took off and flew in front of us because he started to fly even though there was nothing that enabled him to fly. But if you had seen people flying like this since you were born, it would seem normal to you, an ordinary event. But that will still not change the fact that people flying is an extraordinary phenomenon. In the same way, the fact that atoms are doing things that require such a high degree of specialization and that it seems ordinary to us because we see it every day and do not witness the opposite does not change the fact that these events are in fact extraordinary. After witnessing these events and thinking, there's something here that I cannot make sense of. How can these particles do this? And realizing that the alternative options we have just mentioned cannot be an adequate answer. Would it not be more logical for us to conclude that there is a being who can do all these works that we see with your eyes and witness moment by moment, even if we cannot see or perceive them? Wouldn't it be more rational to say that there's a being who has the knowledge, the will, and the life to make them do these things moment by moment, who has the knowledge, the will, and the life to actually do them, rather than seeing beings with no consciousness and no life obeying the laws that would result in the existence of complex structures such as human beings moment by moment, and seeing that they are doing all these things? Wouldn't it be more reasonable to say that there's another being who has the necessary attributes to do these things, rather than answering the question how is sound transmitted with atoms that have no knowledge and and unnecessary attributes? Now consider these questions again, taking into account the 5 points we have mentioned at the beginning and the fact that the words offered as answers to these questions are just nonsense without evidence. You ask if there is evidence for the existence of God, and we say, show us a place where there is no evidence. On the one hand, you have rational, reasoned belief, and on the other hand, alternative options based on fallacies. Which one you prefer is entirely up to you. Now you can believe or not believe. Assalamu alaikum.
Those who have no knowledge say, if only Allah would speak to us, or a sign would come to us. The same was said by those who came before. Their hearts are all alike. Indeed, we have made the signs clear for people of sure faith. They swear by Allah their most solemn oaths that if a sign were to come to them, they would certainly believe in it. Say, signs are only with Allah. What will make you realize that even if a sign were to come to them, they still would not believe?